What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. One Piece is still on break, but we have new One Piece information, so we're going to go over it today. We have the 10 special questions answered by Oda himself, and we have the newest SBS 110. So we're going to hit both of those things today. We're going to talk about them, get some really interesting stuff. Some of the stuff's kind of goofy, so we're not going to hit all of that stuff, but some really cool stuff is in here. Okay, so let's do the questions first. So we got 10 special questions set aside that we have Oda answering himself. And in typical Oda fashion, some of these answers are a bit trolly, but I think the other ones give some pretty good information based on what Oda is willing to give out. So question 1 is talking about Luffy's feather raiment, which I think is just like essentially the flame cloak that Luffy has when he goes Gear 5. And it's talking about how Luffy's able to like pull goggles or like baseball bats. Basically, Luffy can pull anything out of this raiment, which is seemingly out of nowhere. And Oda's answer to that is that it's the entrance to Nika's fantasy. And basically the way I interpret that is that it's hyperspace. It's toon space, basically where you can store anything, no matter the size or shape, and pull it out anytime. And like hyperspace, hammer space, it's a pretty common anime thing for people to just be able to pull things out of nowhere. And basically Oda is saying that Luffy has weaponized that to the greatest extent. In a more figurative sense, I think it's kind of pointing to how Gear 5 and the Nika ability gives Luffy the freedom to kind of do anything. So when he says Nika's fantasy, it's kind of just like whatever Nika can imagine, that's the entrance to that. So when he imagines something, that's kind of where he pulls it from. Second question, talking about how Sabo inherited the Mera and if he's been training with it. Oda says that he trains every day, and since he regained his memory, a lot of things have come back. Now, I don't think that particularly relates to the Mera because any instance that Sabo would have seen the Mera in use would have been like a post-memory loss. Because prior to that, Sabo wouldn't have known memory existed, let alone that Ace had it. But anytime he's seeing that being used, it would have been after he lost his memory. So I don't think there's a whole lot he could have gleaned for the Mera in that particular instance. But as far as like training and like him fighting as a kid, I can see that coming back to him and him being more natural with how he fights. Because we even see that he still uses the pipe, and this is after like a while. The pipe has come back into his arsenal, and he uses the pipe with the Mera, so it's like a fusion of his old fighting style and this new Mera fighting style. Third question, has Dragon ever lived with Luffy? And basically the answer is no. So outside of when like Luffy was born, Dragon did not stay with Luffy. Basically Luffy has no recollection, and we've seen this in the story itself that Luffy didn't even know he had a dad. So it's clear that they didn't spend really any time together that Luffy can even remember. But the reason for this being that he didn't want Luffy's life to be in danger. So basically he separates himself from his family just because he's the most wanted man in the world. And I think that's a pretty given argument. You know, I don't know if he beats the deadbeat dad allegations with that, but it makes sense. And even at the point now where everybody knows Luffy's strong enough to fight anybody that's coming for him, so it doesn't really matter at this point. The only person that might be in trouble is Luffy's mom if she's still alive, but there's a chance we might not even see her in the story, so that might be irrelevant. For question 4, we got the comparison of Blackbeard's ship, the Saber of Sebek, and Roxy Sebek. And in typical Oda fashion, this is where we get Trolly, where Oda says, it's a coincidence, maybe not. However, the way I interpret this is that it's definitely not a coincidence, because Oda is taking this time to answer questions, and some of these questions he gives legitimate answers to. Like specifically the one we'll get to is the Rocky Port incident, and he's like, I won't have time to go over this in the story, so I'll tell you right now. The fact that he's not telling us this right now specifically means that it probably will show up in the story and that it does have some kind of significance to it. So yes, it's a troll, but I think it's an indication of something to come in the future. Question 5. Did Shanks get his Kamusari from Roger, and was it taught, or did he just imitate it? And it turns out he basically just imitated it. So Roger didn't really pass down this move. Shanks remembered it from watching Roger and then started using it on his own. And apparently this move isn't something that you can just imitate. Like it's not just a move that you can like copy and learn. Kind of like how Big Mom copied Ikaku Sovereignty. And for Shanks to be able to do it indicates some really strong talent. I assume this has something to do with hockey. Because I'm like, okay, so they're saying that nobody can just imitate this move. And the first thing I thought of when I saw that was that, okay, so Rayleigh wouldn't be able to do this move. With as strong as Rayleigh is, he wouldn't be able to pull off Kamusari. So that makes me think that Kamusari is a very special technique that you need, I don't know, like a crazy level of hockey to accomplish. And I mean, we know that Rayleigh has really strong hockey, but we know that Shanks might be on their level of hockey. Question 6, cross-guild bounties. So this is basically a breakdown of what the cross-guild bounties mean. And it shows us like what each crown means and the crown relative to berries. So like 1 crown is 10 stars, 1 star is 100 million berries. And that kind of gives you the breakdown of how cross-guild is handling the bounties. Now this does put Akainu, I think, at 5 billion, which is where the likes of Whitebeard and Roger kind of sat in their time. Now, I think I've already seen the comparisons of Admiral versus Yonko pop up, especially because in the SBS as well, we got some Admiral Yonko type stuff. Now, my personal 2 cents, I don't think it means a whole lot because, I mean, there's a hierarchy of power that should be well known where it's like, obviously, Akainu is going to be at the upper echelon. Obviously, he's going to be comparable to a Yonko. I don't think he's stronger than any of the Yonko, or at the very least, any of the seasoned Yonko. I'm not putting him above Kaido, I'm not putting him above Big Mom, and I don't even put him above the Yonko of old, like not Whitebeard, not Roger. Obviously, he's up in the top 10 because he's Akainu, he's a fleet admiral. And bounties are in a comparison of strength, plus this is cross guilds doing, they could be inflating things. There's a lot to go from this. I don't think this is a direct indicator of strength. I think this is just an understanding of how the bounties work. But you know, agenda gonna agenda. Question 7. What kind of work does Aokiji do as the 10th captain of Blackbeard's ship, and does he have subordinates? And I found the answer to this one interesting because, well, yes, he has subordinates. He doesn't do everything that Blackbeard asks him to do. So like he kind of operates on his own for some part. Now it seems like he does still report to Blackbeard, especially like we've seen with Garp, how he reports to Blackbeard after that. But it seems like there are things that he will not do. And it seems like Blackbeard is more or less okay with that because he knows how strong Aokiji is. And he would rather have that in his camp regardless of if he's following all the rules. However, the most interesting part is that Oda says that Aokiji has caused many casualties as a result of being part of Blackbeard's crew. And I would love to know if that's like civilian casualties, if that's pirate casualties, like who has he ended up killing in his conquest to basically find his own justice. I think that adds a lot of depth to Aokiji's character. And I mean, it keeps growing because we've been wondering what Aokiji's true purpose is for a while now. And this just adds more mystery to it. Question 8. What kind of system is the world military draft? So apparently the world government basically poaches strong soldiers from allied countries and brings them into the Marines. Because I believe both Greenable and Fujitora were bought out in a sense, where it's like a large sum of money was used to pull them into the Marines. And it doesn't seem like this is a very positive thing because the nations that kind of lose their strongest soldiers, they become weak. Their military weakens because, you know, like imagine Fujitora is guarding your nation and then he gets bought out by the world government and now he works for the Marines. You just lost a major fighting force for your nation and you have no replacement. And so because of that, there are nations that are rising up because it's like, okay, you're taking our fighting force. We have to fight back with something. And that's where the revolutionaries come in, because they're like, okay, we see you've weakened this nation, we'll step in and we'll be their force. And I think that's very cool because you're tying all these factions together where the revolutionaries are openly opposing the world government, the Marines, the Celestial Dragons. And the reason they're doing this is because, look, obviously it's because of their actions, but it's like a direct correlation between they're trying to bolster their army by weakening others. And then the revolutionaries are trying to help those weakened others rise up against this bolstered army. It's really cool. I like the concept. Question 9, and perhaps the most interesting of them all, is about the Rocky Port incident. Basically, the rumor is that Hachinosu houses a very important poneglyph. Oda doesn't list which one specifically or what kind of poneglyph it is, just that it's incredibly important. And because of that, Law plans to infiltrate the island to get that poneglyph, like probably get a rubbing or to get the information off the poneglyph. And so Law boards this ship, which was supposed to be an important ship carrying a king and nobleman, but it turned out to be a smuggling vessel that was dealing directly with the pirate island. So like one of the underground brokers, probably, it seemed like it was affiliated with him. And essentially what happened is there was some kind of falling out between like the pirates, Law, and the people in Hachinosu. And so this huge fight broke out. And as this was happening, both Kobe and Blackbeard arrived on Hachinosu for separate reasons. And they ended up joining forces. Now, this would mean that they joined forces against who was currently running the island, the people that were doing the underground brokerage. And as far as we know, Wang Ji was ruling the island beforehand. It was mentioned, I think, when Blackbeard was at Amazon Lily, that Wang Ji was the one who was there before, because he was talking to Kobe about how he helped him out. So basically what happened is they toppled Wang Ji. Blackbeard took control of the island. Law ended up becoming a warlord, and Kobe became a hero. And this all happened in the midst of the 2-year time skip. Now, I would have loved to see this in the story, but Oda said that it's probably not going to make it in there, which is why he's kind of breaking it down here. And this isn't even the full explanation of what happened. This is just a really short summary. But I would love a side story for this. I would love to see this in action because this is really good stuff right here. And considering that Wang Ji was part of Rocks, he should be an important character. So I would love to see, fighting styles, what he looked like, how he acted. There's a lot to Wang Ji that I think I wanted to see, especially the fact that he was one of the few surviving members of Rocks that wasn't talked about. Because, we saw the Yonko. We saw Captain John, who was already dead. Gloriosa, Stussy. We see all these people kind of in the aftermath. We haven't seen Wang Ji. And that was specifically one of the names that Sengoku mentioned, where it's you talk about the Yonko, Shiki, Captain John, Wang Ji. So he was a big name. And so they took him down, took over the island. And that's kind of how the events carried out into the New World. Like I said, if we got a chance to see it, it would be legendary. Oh, I love I know they did a side story before with Kobe in it and kind of time skip Kobe, how he had changed. I want to see another one of those. But with the Rocky Port incident, I think that would be clean. And the final question is about Garland. And they're talking about how during the Ghat Valley incident, Garland went to confront the pirates. And how strong is he to have done that? And Oda's answer is very basic. He's strong. There's a reason for his strength. Doesn't go any deeper than that. So you can speculate that it's possible he's a Delph-Root. It's possible that he has some kind of special lineage that gives him strength. He could just be that kind of fighter. We have no idea. But the indication is that there is more to Garland than meets the eye, which we have all suspected. In fact, a lot of us suspect that he is Shanks' dad, and that could even lead back to why Shanks is able to use Kamusari. But those are the 10 special questions. Like I said, some of them were a bit trolly, some of them are really interesting. I like the idea that Oda is taking time to give us some stuff while we're on break. But we've also got some more news because we have SBS. Now, the SBS is a bit more light on information than I think the 10 questions were, but still some cool stuff here. First off, we can talk about the breakdown of the Vice Admirals that were on Egghead. They're making comparisons saying that one looked similar to Rear Admiral Kadar, who was in Fisherman Island, and that's Hound. And then Oda goes on to kind of introduce the rest of the admirals. Turns out Pomsky has the otter fruit and became a sea otter human, which is interesting. Dahl is a straight up martial artist with a rock and roll soul, which I love Dahl, design and everything perfect. Vice Admiral Tosa can bite with his hands. He's an Earth T fist style user, so another martial artist. But it's also a play on like the fighting dog breed. And like some of the other like Pomsky, like Doberman, like Hound, it follows like the dog motif. Vice Admiral Urban ate the Susu no Mi, which is the cannon fruit, and became an artillery human. Apparently the top of his head can become a cannon, which just makes me think about Frankie and his cannon hair. There's Bluegrass, who we were more familiar with. She has the ride fruit, so she can ride anything. And interesting about that, she can turn any living thing or object into something that can be a vehicle. And a lot of times, devil fruits only choose like living objects or non-living objects. There's usually a distinction. Like, for example, Shiki, he can only levitate non-living objects. He can't levitate anything that's alive. For Big Mom, she can't take soul out of inanimate objects, but she can put soul in inanimate objects. And then she can't put other people's souls. Like there's always rules. And it's interesting that hers seems to be somewhat devoid of that rule. There's Hound, who we talked about a little bit earlier. His fruit is basically just the Hound fruit. Very simple. But apparently he's in the same year as Smoker, which is cool. There's Admiral Red King, which I believe is the one that Frankie once shot. He has a steam engine powered right knuckle. So another martial artist, no devil fruit. And then Vice Admiral Guillotine, whose blade on the head can be thrown like a boomerang. Just a lot of quirky Vice Admirals, I'll say. And honestly, outside of Dahl, I didn't really care about any of them. I do like the connection Bluegrass has, because I think Bluegrass is older than Suru, who is like in Garp's era. I'm kind of surprised she's... I mean, I guess it shouldn't be. Suru is still a Vice Admiral, so it's not too surprising that Bluegrass is a Vice Admiral as well. It's just crazy to see how long some of these people stay in the Marines and how they keep their position. And like I said with the SBS, there is some goofy stuff. Like one of these is about the Long Arm tribe having 2 elbows and what names these elbows have. I guess one's the friend elbow and one's the love elbow. Oda is just being Oda with this. There's a bunch of other goofy stuff in here, like how many times Oda has used certain words. Oda does mention that when Luffy goes giant, his clothes change with him, and that's just because he doesn't end up naked. And this is something I think Oda has talked about a while ago, where it's like he doesn't want to keep redrawing clothes, plus he doesn't want characters to just be naked all the time. So essentially the clothes work with the fruit, and we've seen that countless times. That's not super new, but he's just addressing it here. He revealed the tailor of the Gorosei, who looks like some shriveled old cat man. But more interesting stuff, we're talking about Green Bull and Fujitora again, and basically their background, their history. And as we know, they were pulled through from the World Military Draft, which I was talking about earlier. Basically, they were bought out from allied countries. Green Bull was an officer in South Blue, but he got into an incident involving a woman, thrown in prison, and then basically bought out of prison by the Marines. Now, apparently he was incredibly strong, and this is why they scouted him. They don't really go into details about his incident and why he was in prison. And it's very questionable as to why the world government was like, yeah, get that guy. I feel like that's something we might learn a little bit more about, and we might learn about why he loves Akainu so much through this past. But we'll have to wait for the story to clarify that a bit more. Now, Fujitora is from West Blue, and while he served there, he basically was a gambler like he is now, ran into a bunch of debt, and the world government paid for it. Basically, they bought out his debt, and he went to be a Marine instead of being an in-debt bodyguard. Now, apparently, the kingdom that Fujitora was from, the Blue Kingdom, was wiped out in a war. And it seems like the war was probably against the world government, considering they consider Fujitora a criminal at some point for fighting with that kingdom. And so a very interesting point between these two is that they were both seen as criminals. Fujitora and Green Bull were both seen as criminals in their own right. Green Bull was actually in prison, and they were both like, let's buy these dudes out. And it kind of makes me think about the warless system where it's like you have really strong people going against you, and instead of continuously fighting them, you add them to your ranks. And that's basically what they did here. They were like, these two strong people, let's bring them on our side. And I think it points a little bit more to why Fujitora is very against the world government, because one, they destroyed his kingdom, and two, it seemed like he was already fighting against him. And he did basically the opposite of what Aokiji did, where Aokiji broke away from the Marines to find his own sense of justice. It seems like Fujitora joined to find his own sense of justice. I think they both disagree with the world government in a whole, but they're trying to find ways to correct that. Aokiji from the outside, Fujitora from the inside. We got the good and bad time skip for Jinbei, since we got it for the rest of the crewmates. I do like good Jinbei's 80-year-old design. I think it looks really good on him. I honestly don't hate his bad timeline design. The old one's a little rough, but they're really not bad, to be honest. But also, like, good Jinbei is really kind and nice, and old bad Jinbei is just a racist. So basically, he went the Arlong route in the bad timeline. We get a drawing of young Yamato, which is absolutely adorable. Basically, Yamato ate that dough fruit at a very young age, so this is essentially what that form would look like when she first got the fruit. Interestingly enough, it has the awakened cloak around it, which would indicate that it was awakened upon being eaten. And I saw a really cool theory that kind of took the idea that a devil fruit awakens when the mind and body catch up and like they're in sync. And like Yamato has always been wanting to guard Wano as Odin. And Kaido specifically said that this fruit is the guardian deity of Wano. So it's like, it's kind of cool because it all comes to play where Yamato always wanted to be the guardian deity. And then this fruit comes along with that power. So it's like, is it an immediate awakening because they were already aligned? That would be kind of cool. We get some info on Sword, and oddly enough, Oda points us towards the Viver cards for like really in-depth breakdowns. And he specifically says that, you know, he's not encouraging people to just go out and buy the cards for this information. But I think he's just saying that if you want fully like detailed information on certain characters like that, you might have to go to the Viver cards because an SBS is not big enough to do all that stuff in. But yeah, it has a breakdown of like ages and heights, and then kind of just some like relationship stuff. Basically, Kujaku, Groose, and Drake, they're all very close in a way that while they're outranked by Drake, they all kind of act the same. And Groose isn't technically a prince, he's just a rich kid, but he goes by that name. That's more of an epithet than it is a actual lineage. And he's also the second oldest, with Drake being the oldest at 33, Groose is 29, Kujaku is 26, Kobe's 18, Hibari's 17, Helmeppo's 22, which I didn't expect. I thought Helmeppo would be like the same age as Kobe. But on to the most interesting reveal of the SBS. So we know that in chapter 103, Luffy was struggling. He had just gotten out of gear 5, he didn't have anything to eat, but all of a sudden food showed up out of nowhere. And we speculated for such a long time, where did this food come from? One of the clear answers was Kizaru. And honestly, when we speculated that, it was because the panels that showed Kizaru before and after, he went from laying down to sitting up. And it was very distinct difference of what he was doing in that time. So we're like, did he speed blitz everybody and give Luffy some food? But we never got that clarification until now. And even now, Oda's still trolling us a little bit because he's like, I wonder who it was. Was it Sanji? Was it Frankie? Kizaru and Sentomaru were also there. Whoever did it never got exposed. It seems that action seemed to be done in the speed of light. And then he emphasizes speed of light again. So it's like, gee, I don't know who did it, but if they did do it, they move at the speed of light. Also, Kizaru was there, which is interesting. So it's like he's heavily pointing at Kizaru. I think very specifically at this time, Frankie and Sanji are both pinned down by Saturn. So it's very unlikely that it's them. And I think the fastest person on Egghead would be Kizaru, the guy made of light, who can move at the speed of light. So yeah, it's probably Kizaru. I know a lot of people were saying it's Sanji. Sanji couldn't even move. And it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for Sanji to do that and then not have any indication that it was Sanji. It makes more sense that if Kizaru did it, that it wasn't shown because it's supposed to be like, okay, Kizaru is very clearly sandbagging. Like he's not taking this seriously. He wants it to work out differently than it's currently going. We see that throughout the entirety of the arc, that Kizaru is kind of against what's going on here. So while we didn't get 100% confirmation, we basically got pointed in the direction of Kizaru. And this is the thing I was talking about where we're kind of getting the Admiral Yonko debate, because at this point, Kizaru could have finished off Luffy and there's nothing he could have done. While true, I think there are a few things with that don't necessarily apply to Admiral versus Yonko, which is that I think Luffy is still on the lower tier of Yonko. Where it's like people are saying that Admirals can beat Yonko because Kizaru could have beat Luffy here. And it's like, okay. I mean, Kaido can still beat Luffy in Gear 5. People still have Shanks beating Luffy in Gear 5. Like, Gear 5 Luffy isn't... I understand the hype of Gear 5 Luffy when it first came out. It didn't make him top 1 in the verse. It secured his spot in top 10, I would say. He's not top 1. There are still plenty of people that are above him. So Kizaru being able to beat Luffy doesn't make Admirals above all the Yonko. It means one of the older Admirals, one of the more experienced Admirals, can beat the freshest Yonko, which is fine. There is always going to be power discrepancy, but it's not just an over-eclipsing arc of, okay, these people are stronger than those people. It's always been nuanced. You can always fit like members of the Admirals into Yonko. Because I would say like the top 2 strongest are Yonko, then I'm gonna go Admiral, then I'm gonna go Yonko, then I'm gonna go Admiral. I would point out like that. I don't think it's just straight all the Yonko are stronger than all the Admirals. There's nuance to it. There's stuff that you have to kind of think about when it comes to who can fight who has better feats, this, that, and the other. It's a whole power scaling debate that we won't have on this episode. But just thought I'd point out because that's one of the main things I've been seeing is Admiral versus Yonko debates skyrocketing with the bounty reveals and the Kizaru moving at speed of light and doing things while Luffy was out. And just thought I'd throw my 2 cents in just to have some fun with it. But that is all the news for the questions and the SBS. All this came from PewPiece on Twitter. I will leave the link in the description below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.